Hello, everybody. Can you hear me in the back? It's okay? All right, fine. And for some reason, I'm sorry? What is the question?
I need a paper.
There'll be some other copies of the syllabus coming in just a few minutes, and when you come, just raise your hand. I think I'll get a signal that when they are here, and those of you who need one, raise your hand, and I don't think it'll bother me if they come in and hand them to you while I'm talking. In fact, there's not a whole lot that bothers me when I'm talking. I do seem to bring out the storms. I mean, it seems to me the last time I was lecturing in here, we were about to have a thunderstorm, and I noticed that the clouds have gathered again for today's lecture. I hope that's not some kind of ill omen. But in any event, I really appreciate you coming back. If you came the first time, and if you're here for the first time, then welcome. And we are going to try to get you some syllabi. Today's lecture was not announced in the tails. I don't know why, but in any event, it was not in the calendar, the weekly calendar. I hope it will be announced in the weekly calendar for the next 3 times. There are 3 more lectures that go through July the 1st, Monday, July the 1st. So please count on that if you are appreciating what we're trying to do in this course. As I've said to you before, and said to you, I think, in just about all of the lectureships that I've given here, every lecture needs a theme song. And we do have a theme song, and I hope at least those of you who, I hate to say, the A+ students are the ones who brought their syllabus back with them today. Okay, I see everybody's trying to get extra credit out there. Okay, but also we save paper if you bring your syllabus back. And there'll be more handouts next time, so there'll be new handouts. So, okay, well, our pianist, I don't know where she is today, so we'll have to do it a cappella. Is that okay? So if I can start it on the right key, we'll sing our theme song. But before we sing it, the second stanza is the new one. The second stanza says that the age of reason's in our sight, right? Philosophs who turned on the light. Now you have to say philosophs. Everybody say philosophs. Okay. Philosophs who turned on the light. You have to do it that quickly. And then we have who are the people then? then come the people who, the whole course is, the second half of the course is about romantics who said that's not right and preferred the mystery of the night. Now, that little ditty is an attempt to try to capture the entire 5 weeks in 4 lines, and so I hope it'll become clearer as we go along. I will say a word about the philosophs. The philosophs are the intellectual leaders of the Age of Reason. The Age of Reason is centered primarily in Paris and in France and in England. But then it spread to Scotland, and to Italy, to Spain, across the ocean, to America. The people who put our Constitution together were people who were deeply cognizant of all the writings of the 18th century Enlightenment figures. And so, but the term philosophe does not mean what you might think it means at first glance. At first glance, it looks like the word for philosopher. These people were not philosophers in the sense of people who speculate upon the meaning of reality. I mean, they did some of that too, but they were not professional philosophers. They were publicists, they were writers, they were reformers, they were lawyers, they were doctors, they were mainly professional people, but they did not teach philosophy in the colleges or something. So when you say philosophers, you're not talking about philosophers per se. You're talking about a great variety of people who were leaders in society. Is that makes sense to you? So that's one of the words, philosophers, who turned on the light. Romantics who said that's not right, and what they're saying is not right is that life should be governed solely by the appeal to human reason, okay? So when the Romantics said that's not right, they're saying we disagree, that reason is all that important. In fact, they think it's right down deleterious to the well-being of society. So, and then they liked things that had to do with emotion, that had to do with mystery, the exotic kinds of things the Romantics do. I think we'll be able to demonstrate that for you before this course is over. And so that's when I say, and those who preferred the mystery of the night. I'm trying to say that the Romantics were people who ran away from reason and went toward emotion. That's why we call this course Dionysus versus Apollo. Apollo being the god of the sun god, the god of light, the god of reason, and Dionysus being the god of wine, the god of the exotic, the god of the mysterious and the mystifying and so on. All right, all of that by way of singing our little ditty. Okay, so if you've got the words in front of you, or if you remember them by heart from last time, I will go ahead and do them. All right, Zachary tells me that if you'll raise your hand, he has some copies of the syllabus for those who need them. I told him to make about 15. Maybe we'll need more than that. We'll see. Yeah. All right. So we'll let that. We don't want to sing until everybody has a chance to concentrate on the words. All right. All right. You remember the words start. Oh, won't you come along with me? We're going to class to study history. We may not get from A to Z, but we shall see what we shall see, okay? And then we go, the age of reasons in our sight. We got some more hands up, Zachary. Okay, all right. So I don't want to delay this too much longer, but one more up here. I think over there, George. Pass it across the aisle. Yeah, okay. Okay, all right. We don't want to take a whole lot of time on that. All right, let's go ahead and sing. Okay, you ready to sing? Yeah. Everybody? All right. All right, one more trip down the aisle from Zach here. By the way, Eric and Zach are here today, and this particular session is going to be videotaped and shown on 970. So if you want to turn around and smile now and then or something, that's, you can do that. Yeah. All right, I think we're ready to go. Thank you, Zach. Appreciate it so much, Eric. Okay. All right. Are you now? Oh, won't you come along with me? We're going to class to study history. We may not get from A to Z, but we shall see what we shall see. We have the reasons in our sight. Like the Romantics who said that's not right. And mystery of the night. All right, okay. I'll learn the words next time, maybe. Okay. All right. Well, you're good scouts to join in singing that crazy song. Okay. There was an old-time preacher who used to tell his congregation that he was describing the way he delivered his sermons. And he said, the first thing I do is I tell them what I'm going to tell them. Then the second part of it, I tell them what I told them I was going to tell them. And then finally he says, I tell them what I told them. And so I'm going to tell you, first of all, what I'm going to tell you. Then I'm going to tell you what I told you I was going to tell you. And then at the end, I'll summarize it and tell you what I told you. All right. Okay. Today, what we're going to do is take what happened in our first lecture. In our first lecture, what we attempted to show is that in the realm of the physical world, the natural world, with names such as going way back to the 2nd century when we had Claudius Ptolemy, who wrote the book called The Greatest by the Arabs in the 12th century, a book that described how the geocentric world worked. And he so carefully worked out that it held the field for 1,300 years, from the 2nd century till the 16th century. When in the 16th century, Nicholas Copernicus will write the very famous book titled The Revolution of the Heavenly Bodies, and overturns the whole notion of a geocentric universe to a heliocentric universe, a sun-centered universe. And then one of the things that Copernicus left out was, once you take away the geocentric, the circles that rotated around each other in the Almagest, as Claudius Ptolemy showed, the question was, how is it that the Earth and the planets stayed in their orbits around the sun? And it was Sir Isaac Newton. I remember we had a song about Sir Isaac Newton. Sir Isaac Newton was the one who discovered how it was that all the Earth and the planets and other things stayed in their orbits around the sun. And of course, this is the theory of gravity, the law of gravity. But Sir Isaac Newton not only discovered the laws of motion and the law of gravity, but he gave us a whole new concept of the universe and of how we're to look at the universe. The universe, to be sure, was created by a universal intelligence that they still call God. But this universe, once it was made and all of its parts were put together, then God had no need to step in from the beginning of time until the end of time. God will be at the beginning, God will be at the end, but God is not really necessary in the middle, because he had made this universe with such precision, with such care, with all of its parts working with such precision that there was no need for God to interfere. Later on, when we get to the section on religion in this course, we will see that a new religion will emerge out of that application of reason to religion. It's going to be called deism, but that will come considerably later. So what will happen is that here you have Sir Isaac Newton, who's given us a universe like a great clock. It has its wheels, its cogs, its hands, its springs. It's all there, and it works precisely. You can set your schedule by it. You can run your life by that clock, because it will keep correct time. And so the universe, so Sir Isaac Newton said, is a universe that is predictable. We will be, if we can understand its laws, then we can predict certain things in the future. And I'll mention that just 10 years before Newton published the Principia, the mathematical principles of natural philosophy, Halley discovered the comet and predicted when that comet would come back again and again in the future. What you have to understand that is taking place here is that for at least 1,500 or 1,700 years prior to the 18th century, people discerned reality and attempted to live their lives on the basis of finding out what was the will of God. Now, with Sir Isaac Newton and the scientific discovery and the application of reason to discover those laws and to clear the debris out of the way so these laws could function in society, you have natural law, reason, and at the end of the 18th century, a Frenchman by the name of Condorcet will write a book entitled The Progress of the Human Mind. And in this book he says, given a universe such as Newton has demonstrated, given minds such as John Locke and people like Bacon and Descartes have demonstrated, there is no limit to the progress that human beings can make in this world. This is the most optimistic. I mean, if you compare this to the Reformation, the Middle Ages, even the Renaissance, as optimistic as we think many of the Renaissance figures were, this is all nothing compared to what we're seeing in the age of reason in terms of optimism. The idea of progress, the idea that human happiness is possible. In the Middle Ages, this world is not our home. We're just a passing through. Our treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. Well, this is not the way the leaders of the age of reason will see things. They believe that they have minds and the power of reason to discover the laws that govern the universe, and that if they can apply these laws, there is no limit to the progress and human happiness that can be enjoyed. Am I making sense so far? Okay. All right. Now, what people will begin to say in the 18th century. Now, again, when I say people, and I scold my students at VCU for saying just people, what people? I mean, tell me who. I mean, is it just the man on the street? Well, the ones who are leading the charge, as it were, for the Enlightenment or the Age of Reason are the people that the French call the philosophes. As I said, these are the thinkers, these are educated people. These are not the people working in the fields. These are not the people who are working in the newly developing factories that accompanies the Age of Reason. The Industrial Revolution is beginning to go simultaneously with all of these things that we're talking about. These people will get the trickle-down effect of what's going on at the top. But they're not the people who are discussing these issues. You understand? I mean, just like now, when you and I, and certainly I certainly am not one who could talk about nuclear physics or many mathematical formulas or so many of these things, but we kind of get second-hand versions. I mean, something I didn't mention last time, but I did note it in the syllabus, that there was a Venetian by the name of Francesco Algarotti, who studied Newtonianism, that is Sir Isaac Newton's Principia, and the males among the philosophes would get together and discuss these things, and at one of their meetings, their salons or their meetings in the academy, as they called it, somebody said, You know, it's just too bad that women lack the capacity to read and understand these things the way we men do. And so Francesco Algarotti said, well, why don't we publish a simplified version of the Principia so that the women could have a chance to get in on all of this. And so Algarotti will publish a work entitled Newtonianism for Ladies. Newtonianism for Ladies. I think I've mentioned that on the sheet that you have. We're going to have some ladies who don't like the sound of that in the 18th century. I know you ladies, as liberated as you are, don't like the sound of it, but there were people who were contemporary with all of these things that didn't like the sound of it as well. One of them we'll get to a little later. I'll just tell you her name now, Mary Wollstonecraft. Do you see that name? She will publish a book in the 1790s, I think 1792, somewhere along in there, entitled The Vindication of the Rights of Women, a vindication of the rights of women. But she's not the only expression of the role and the power of women in the Age of Reason, the 18th century Enlightenment. Women, particularly noble women, that is, women in the nobility, and some of the upper bourgeoisie, I can't say the word, the upper bourgeoisie, the women in the upper middle class, okay, the wealthier middle class. I don't know why I can't say bourgeoisie. Anyway, so the noble women or the wealthier women, they will open the main hall of their large houses and will invite the men and some women, but mainly the men, to come into those halls and to sit down, and for 4 hours at a time, these women would lead the discussion and would throw out questions for the men to discuss. And just happened to have, if I do, did I bring it or not? I may have in a pocket here somewhere. Am I sitting on it? I'm sitting on it, okay. There was we have the memoirs of a Jean Mar Montel. I don't think I've got that in your syllabus. But in his memoirs, he writes about the experience in one of these great halls and the woman who is leading this discussion. And he says that the circle was formed of people who were not linked together. She had broken them down into groups, but she chose them so well that when they were together, they harmonized like the strings of an instrumental tuned, can't read my writing, tuned by a cunning hand. And it says, at the end, it says, her gift for throwing out an idea and giving to men of this type to discuss was an extraordinary gift. These gifts, I say, are not those of an ordinary woman. It was not with fashionable trifles or self-conceit that every day for 4 hours, conversation without weariness or emptiness, she knew how to make herself interesting to these brilliant people. So there you go, ladies. I mean, the women have a powerful role in the 18th century Enlightenment, calling the men together and giving them topics to energize their conversation. For 4 hours, you only get 50 minutes of kind of talking. 4 hours. Can you imagine sitting around and talking about these things for 4 hours? Well, okay. So you say, I want you to repeat after me now, because we got to launch into this. So I'll give you a word, and you say the word, and we're going to memorize these 3 things. Okay. Natural law.
Natural law.
Reason.
Reason.
Progress. Once more. Natural law. Reason. Progress. Okay. Now, once you have those in place, what is going to happen is that people will begin to say, well, if there are laws that govern the natural and physical universe, it's reasonable to suppose, extremely common sense to think, that there are also laws that govern politics, economics, education, justice, and even religion. So our task, they said, is to find these laws, to clear out the debris so that these laws can be seen clearly and so they can be applied. And when they are discovered and applied, then society will just become the most beautiful, wonderful, utopian place that you can imagine. Does that make sense? I mean, if indeed these things are true, then our expectations are limitless, aren't they? Okay, all right, well, let's see. Let's start with politics. Yeah, okay. I mean, are there natural laws of politics? Well, Thomas Jefferson said there were, didn't he? And where does he find them? You remember the last time we looked at politics in here, just mentioned it, you probably didn't even notice it when we passed it. We talked about a writing by an archbishop in the time of Louis XIV, the Sun King of France, who was contemporary with all these things that we're talking about. Louis XIV needed to have a strong case made for his role as an absolute monarch. And Bishop Bousset, who I do name in your syllabus, Bishop Bousset wrote a book, Politics Drawn from the Very Words of Holy Scripture. Politics drawn from the very words of Holy Scripture. That was the last book of that kind in the history of Western civilization. Because after that, people are going to turn to reason. What does Thomas Jefferson say about where we learn about the nature of politics, political reality? We hold these truths to be what? Self-evident. What chapter and verse of Scripture is that? I mean, unless you make up one, there is no such chapter or verse. What does he mean? But what is a self-evident truth? A self-evident truth is a truth that anybody who is reasonably intelligent and is reasonably educated, common sense, is able to see. I mean, it's obvious. It's as plain as my mother used to say to me, as the nose on your face. And so it's a self-evident truth is one that if you use your reason, experience, and reason, you will know what it is. Well, what were the self-evident truths that he underscored? That all people are created equal and are endowed with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and a brand new one, the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness. For 1,300 years, nobody thought of pursuing happiness in this life, where there was no chance of being happy in this world in Christianity. According to, I mean, you might have a few periods of it, but true happiness in Christianity is in the world to come. Now what the age of reason people are going to say is that happiness is not only possible, it is achievable in this life. Okay? Now you say, nonsense. These people hadn't lived they must have died at 30 or 32 or something, because if they had lived as long as we have, they would know that there's not all that happiness to be found in life or in the world. But they believed that it was. They believed that you could find it. They were extremely optimistic about this life. Okay, and so are you going to find laws, natural laws of politics? Well, the best book about it all was written by a Frenchman. In fact, he was preeminent among the philosophers in France. His name was Montesquieu, Baron de Montesquieu. You'll see him. And he wrote a book entitled The Spirit of the Laws. The Spirit of the Laws. Now, in each of the ways in which people will apply the natural laws to the social world, there is an enemy against whom or against which they are opposing themselves. The enemy of the 18th century Enlightenment political scientists, you might say, is absolute monarchy. They are adamantly opposed to absolute monarchy because absolute monarchy is unreasonable, they said. And Montesquieu, in his book, The Spirit of the Laws, says that absolute monarchy is unreasonable. Why is it unreasonable, does he argue? He argues that it is unreasonable because he says government has three purposes. The common sense teaches us. The laws need to be made, and of course, you make these laws based upon your discovery of the natural laws, which lead you to make the laws. The power to make the laws, legislative power, the power to execute the laws, that is to carry out the laws that have been made, and the power to judge when those laws are broken and to punish those who have violated the laws. What do we call those? Legislative, executive, and judicial dimensions of government. Now, common sense, so Montesquieu argues, common sense teaches us that that is the role of government. Laws made, laws executed, laws judged when the laws are broken. So now, Montesquieu proceeds further. He says that if the executive, legislative, and judicial, this is why absolute monarchy is unreasonable, he says, because anytime the legislative, executive, and judicial powers of government are concentrated in one man, he says one man, or one body, there can be nothing but tyranny. I'll say that again. He says that that is a natural law of politics, that if, I guess you'd say it was unnatural law of politics, that if the legislative, executive, and judicial powers of government are concentrated in the same person and the same body, there can be no liberty. That can be only tyranny. Therefore, common sense, reasonable politics teaches us that the powers of government ought to be separated. What's the separation of powers? The legislative separate from the executive, the judiciary separate from the executive and the legislative. The separation of powers, and then another principle that is common sense and reasonable is that the powers are then balanced. Separation of powers, balance of power. All of this comes out of Montesquieu's The Spirit of the Laws. Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, Monroe, all of the people who put together the American Constitution were avid students of the writings of Montesquieu. They had virtually memorized the spirit of the laws and built those same principles into the Constitution of the United States of America. I got to take a deep breath now. I mean, is that again? Tell me if that is it hold together so far? I mean, you understand? Or is it not all that esoteric? Is it? Okay, that is reasonable politics, Montesquieu says. That's we have found the laws, the natural laws of politics, he says. We've discovered them. We have used our reason to understanding, interpret them, and we're going to apply them. And when we apply them, we will reform government and make politics happy. Okay? Wouldn't we like to do that? Okay. All right. Well, there are other writers. Tom gets away pretty quickly, far more quickly than I intend. Okay. Well, that's politics. There are other writers. Rousseau wrote a work entitled The Social Contract. He goes much further than Montesquieu because Montesquieu basically admired the English monarchy. By the way, Montesquieu has a deep distrust of democracy. Montesquieu does not find democracy very reasonable because he says if you let ignorant and unenlightened people decide what laws there will be and how they're carried out and so on, you've got a mess on your hands, and there's nothing very reasonable about that. But we'll get to that later. Well, but Rousseau has a greater trust of people. He tries to balance the individual with some kind of governmental structure. Montesquieu and Thomas Jefferson, they talked about a social contract between the governed and the government, a contract that the people make between themselves, and then they turn the power to make the laws and to execute them and to judge them to a smaller group of people. Rousseau says there's no reason that the whole populace cannot govern effectively. What they need to do is decide what everybody, or at least 90% of the people, want. And once they have discerned what Rousseau calls in the social contract, the general will, then he says the general will can be carried out in society. Now, he's not very clear on exactly how the general will is determined. How can you get all the people in the world together and have them raise their hands and say, this is my opinion, that's my opinion, and finally we get it all stilled down until, okay, we've got a good opinion about the legislature now, okay, a good opinion about the, that sounds so unwieldy. And he does admit that some forms of government are better for certain groups of people in society or certain places in the world. And he says that democracy works where you have a small group of people, where you can get together in a room and vote. And he says that monarchy is the best for a large group of people. You need somebody at the top who tells everybody else what to do, although there's some limits on him. And all of these people, Montesquieu and Rousseau and Thomas Jefferson, all agree that if the governmental structure does not carry out the will of the people, does not govern equitably, does not carry out liberty in society, then the people, reason teaches that they have a right to dismantle that government and put a new one in its place. Well, all of this sounded reasonable to some people about the natural laws and reasonable government, but Mary Wollstonecraft, whom I mentioned earlier, Mary Wollstonecraft is the mother of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, by the way. And Mary Wollstonecraft, a highly intelligent English woman, carefully studied Montesquieu, Rousseau. She was as much involved in all of this as any of the men were involved in it. She wrote a work entitled A Vindication of the Rights of Women. And she plunges right in and she says, what is more unreasonable, men, than for you to exclude from participation in the political world than to shut out half the population, the voices of half the population. And so she goes down the line and she says, you've got to, if you're going to talk about what's reasonable and what's unreasonable, then you cannot exclude the voices of women. You must allow the women to vote, to serve in the legislatures, to participate in the government at all levels. And so it's a very powerful statement that she makes. Okay, hurry on from politics to education. Did the philosophes find natural laws in the realm of education? Well, let me say first of all, I told you that what the philosophes found to be unnatural in politics was absolute monarchy. What the philosophes, or what the leaders of the Age of Reason will find unnatural in education is what, and I hate to say it like this, bringing people in a room and having them sit down in chairs and being talked to. This is unnatural education. Catechetical and memorization, he said, is the worst form of education. That is unnatural education. So what does the law of nature, what are nature's laws regarding education? It's really kind of the word that we'll use when we get to economics. It's laissez-faire. Let them alone. Let them do as they will. The natural law of education is going to be according to Rousseau now. And Rousseau will write a work entitled, very simply, Emile, E-M-I-L-E. Now that doesn't sound like a very highfalutin title for a book about education. I mean, when you think of the mathematical principles of natural philosophy or the revolutions of the heavenly bodies, or the spirit of laws of Montesquieu, a book with a person's name. Who is Emile, for goodness sakes? Emile is Rousseau's son. Okay, and so what are you going to find to be the natural laws of education is found in Rousseau's Emile. The big word for education. What is natural education? It is usefulness, Rousseau says in Emile. Usefulness. You ask yourself, what is the use of it? Why do I have to know that? God knows, all the years that I've taught history at VCU, I've had hundreds and hundreds of students ask me, why do I have to know this? And what is the use of it to me? And of course, I hope I can make a case, but I'm not too sure that I ever do. But in any event, Rousseau says the question is, what's the use of it? And so instead, he pulls Emile out of the catechetical schools, the Catholic schools of the day, where they go and sit down, they're given a book, and you've got the questions, you've got the answers, you memorize these, you wrote memorization of all these things. And you're able to repeat them back, you hope, and that's called education. Unnatural, Rousseau says. What are the natural laws of it? You take Emile out for a walk, and you walk along the countryside, and you come to a stream, and you look at the stream coming down, and how it flows and how it turns and everything, and so Emile asks questions of Rousseau. He says, Father, the trees the trees in the forest are perpendicular, but the trees along the banks of the stream, lean in toward the stream. Why is that? And so Rousseau then has an opportunity to say, well, let's take a look at how the stream comes down. What is it doing? And he notes that the stream undercuts the roots of some of the trees, and the trees begin to lean more toward the stream. And on they go. There is moss on the sides of the tree. What is that, Father? What's that green stuff on the tree? And so that gives Emile a chance to talk about it. Let the child's interest, let the experience and the interest of the child govern the direction in which the education will go. This is natural education. This is reasonable education, according to Rousseau. They get in the middle of the forest, and Rousseau talks to him a little bit before they go. They live in a town named Montmorency. I'll spell it to you if you come to me later. They live in the town of Montmorency, and they see a grove of trees out in front of the town. And the Montmorency is south of the forest. The forest is north of Montmorency. And so Rousseau is talking to the boy about astronomy and about geography and so on. And so they end the day after a little session of just a lecture like we're doing now. The next day, they go for a stroll in the forest. And they get in the middle of the forest, and Emile says, I think we're lost, Father. And Rousseau says, yeah, I don't know where we are either. And so, and Emile gets real frightened about this. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? I'm hungry. How are we going to get food? How are we going to get out of here? And Rousseau says, well, now, you remember some of the things we talked about just today? And about the sun, the shadows of the sun, and where the shadows fall and so on. Oh, yes, okay. And so soon, Emile is using the lessons that they'd learned and had found that they were very useful for finding their way out of having been lost in the forest. That, Rousseau says, is natural, reasonable education over against catechetical memorization, rote learning, and so on. A Swiss educator by the name of Pestalozzi, I've got his first name now. Anyway, I think it's on your list. Pestalozzi was his name. Okay, all right. In any event, Pestalozzi will write another one of those books about education that has a very strange title. I mean, you would think it. I mean, when you look at some modern dissertations written by PhDs in education and compare it with the title of Emile, or Pestalozzi's book about education is How Gertrude Teaches Her Children. And that is a very famous book, a very famous manual for reasonable, common sense education, and how the principles set forth by Rousseau and Emile can be applied in the classroom. And it's about a real woman named Gertrude, who was a mother and a housewife, but who raised her children in a certain way. Pestalozzi will call the form of education that Gertrude will use with regard to her children education of the hand, the head, and the heart. Education by hand, head, and heart. This is reasonable, common sense, natural education. These people they believe that if you can put these things into practice, there is no limit to the progress that can be made in politics and in education. Let me see. Do I have time to go? It won't take a minute to do just economics. Okay, economics, and we do economics in 5 minutes. Yes, they found principles of economics, natural laws of economics, reasonable economics. The reasonable laws of economics, just really one famous author. Everybody knows who that is. His book was published in 1776, and it's called, who are we going to talk about now? Who? Good. I'd forgotten, so I appreciate you. All right. Adam Smith, right. And Adam Smith will tell us that the natural, who is the enemy? What is unnatural economics? According to Adam Smith, it is mercantilism. Mercantilism. And this is very relevant now, very useful, because mercantilism says that all economic activity must be in the service of the state of a particular country. And secondly, mercantilism says that you must place tariffs on imported goods in order to make sure that you have a favorable balance of trade. Unnatural, says Adam Smith. So Adam Smith then will argue that there's what is then the natural law of economics? The natural law of economics is laissez-faire. Let everybody pursue his own selfish aims to gain property, to gain wealth. Let the government keep its hands off it. The government has only 3 roles, Adam Smith will say, and that is to maintain social order within society, to prevent attacks from an external power so that economics can function, and thirdly, to do for a great number of people what an individual or a few individuals cannot do for themselves. Some public works, some public institutions. All down the line, these people are finding the natural laws of politics, of education, of economics, trying to then clear out the old ways of looking at them, reform things so that society can pursue an optimistic, reasonable course. And I'll stop right there for today.